Hello everyone, welcome to another video. This is actually going to be the final video in the series of league matches I'm playing on Thursdays. That league is finished for now at least. So I'm still obviously going to be doing videos on the 4NCL Congress and the 4NCL League. And I'm also going to be doing videos on the London League, which is every Wednesday at the same time. And a few videos here and there on my games like Blitz and Rapid and stuff. But this is the final Thursday league, and we actually were going to win as a team no matter what the result of this final match. However, I was playing a candidate master from Singapore who I believe is actually a lot better than their rating. I think they're 2210 or something, but they're playing more like 2400. And then down the boards they were very, very strong. So we weren't actually really expecting to get anything from this match. And I will preface showing this game by saying I think both of us in this match played like IMs or better. It's one of the best games I've ever played, I think. So they played d4, I played knight f6, c4, and then I actually played the move e5, the Budapest Gambit. I thought it would be a good way to finish the league by either going down in flames or by winning in a spectacular fashion. And also my opponent had very generously decided to not claim a default because I was half an hour late to the match. So we had an hour for the full game with 15-second increments, but I said that I would resign if my clock went below half an hour in recompense for being so late. So also I know the theory up to about move 17, move 18 in lots of lines, so I don't need to think too hard for the main part of the opening. They took, I played knight g4, bishop f4, the most critical line to defend the pawn, check, and actually here I was really hoping they would play knight d2, and then I can play d6, which goes into all sorts of complicated lines. After knight d2, d6, and if pawn takes, then queen f6. And I'm attacking so much stuff that white has to be unbelievably careful and know their theory back to front, which they may do. A lot of players at this level know tons of theory, but this is a sort of really specific sideline, so it is very possible that they wouldn't have known what to do. However, that didn't happen. Knight c3 was played. This is the more challenging variation. But what it does is it does allow me to double up white's pawns, attack on e5, they defend, queen e7, and queen d5. This is recommended by Yasser Sarawan in some of his lectures on the Budapest opening, where he claims that white essentially is just winning from this position because black doesn't really have a way to win back the pawn. This is, incidentally, I think the one line of the Budapest Gambit where black cannot win back the pawn they've gambited. So white's planning h3, forcing the knight to h6 with a huge advantage. So I have to play f6. White needs to take to retain the pawn. Knight takes, and queen d3. Then I played d6, which is the mainline move. This hasn't really been played that much at very top levels because most grandmasters seem to agree with Sarawan and seem to be under the impression that black is simply lost or significantly worse. And g3 is played. e3 is an alternative move, but I think g3 is actually the best by test in practical play. Knight to e4. Bishop g2, white's planning castling on the king's side, so am I, but first I manoeuvre the knight to c5. This prevents white from breaking with pawn c5 at an inopportune moment, and I'm blockading the two c-pawns. So if I can hold this position with no other weaknesses besides being a pawn down, perhaps black does have enough for a level position. Queen e3. Then knight to e6. This has only been played a couple of times, and I thought that after castles, I'm sure that I've seen a game with queen d2, and then I can take the bishop on f4, and black actually may be equal there. But the move I was not expecting, knight g5, and I wasn't quite sure what to play here. Knight takes knight might be okay, but then white keeps their two bishops, and I don't have two bishops, so white would have the edge. So I thought, alright, take the bishop, get the pair of bishops off the board. White must take with the pawn, so they've now got two sets of doubled pawns. And maybe taking the queen is best, to be honest. But I wanted to keep my counterplay with the queens. This may not have been the right decision because of queen d3, aiming at my pawn with checkmate. So I block. Check, very good intermezzo. I thought e4 was going to be played by white, and then I think if I play bishop g6, it's probably okay for black. But with this bishop check, it was very annoying after e4, because if I moved the bishop back to g6, I saw that the move knight to e6 is very hard to meet. It's not an easy position to play at all. The threat is attacking my rook and also attacking the c7 pawn with a very big advantage for white. And also it defends f4 as well, so it just is not the kind of game I want to be playing. I decided to play h6, countering. They took, now they've got tripled isolated pawns and doubled isolated pawns. It's quite impressive really. White has managed to get 7 of their pawns to be isolated. I took. Queen h3, move I hadn't really looked at that much, but I have to block. So white is able to get the queen trade and have a better position. Rook b1, really nice move. I thought they were going to take on g5 actually, then I could take back. And all of white's pawns being isolated should mean that despite being a pawn down, I can hold. However, if I lose the b pawn, things could get ugly. But there isn't really a good alternative. Rook a b8 might be a move, but I didn't like playing so passively. I took the pawn. Rook b7. And if white keeps the bishop on the board, rooks and bishops work really well together, but rooks and knights not so much. That made knight e7 an easy move to play, trying to get rid of their bishop. They obliged by taking a pawn, and we both took. And I took. And here's one of the strange things, is that, maybe apart from my opening choice, I haven't really played any mistakes at all this game. I think I've played it fairly well, and I'm not sure that many players could play this as well, to be honest. But my opponent was equally, knowing their theory, they knew the right ideas, and they handled their advantage very well. So apparently, according to a computer after the game, it said that white was still significantly better here, sort of plus 1.2, I think. Despite all their pawns being isolated, their rook on the 7th, on c7, is a key contributor to white's advantage. But with the one move, pawn takes pawn, the advantage just completely dissipates. I take check, and apparently here rook g7 is the best move, but I played rook a5 because I want to defend the a pawn and attack the a2 pawn, forcing white to defend it or to not defend it. And in this case, I thought they were going to play rook at a1, then my rook on a8 can move out and do stuff. But this move was useful, rook d7. And I then remembered my my principles of endgame survival, which is try to trade as many pawns as you can. So I'm simply trading pawns going into a drawn endgame. I played rook f8. Rook takes h6 is the move I was analysing, and it was played. So it looks like black is 2 pawns down, which you'd be right in thinking. But then I can capture on f2. And I don't mind trading a rook, because there is a phrase, all rook and pawn endgames are drawn. With doubled rooks, though, it is a little bit more difficult to draw these endgames. So we both took. This is a completely drawn position, and rook c7 is what I thought was going to be played, but I have a saving move. Although the computers analytic brain says that king f6 is best. But what was I going to play? Yeah, a fairly simple move. I was going to play rook f7. The key point is to notice what happens if the rooks trade. And despite being a pawn down, the white king can never get to a1 in time for my pawn. So you may at first think the king is inside the square of the pawn. It takes the pawn 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 moves to get to the corner. It takes white 6 moves as well. But of course black can move 2 squares. So white cannot catch it. And if white tries pushing their pawn up, and my one comes up at the same time, like this, I will simply move my king over to catch the pawn, and they will be much too slow to stop me. Then h5, and a2, you can see where this is going. Queen, king takes, h6, and I queen. And simply play simple chess. Queen h8 and take the pawn. I'll win. So black would not have lost the pawn. And one pawn down I should be able to draw, because the pawns are so far away, the white king can't defend both and help both of them come up the board. So rook a6 was played. I still played rook f7. King g2. Rook c7, trying to win the pawn. I'm happy to get rid of my a pawn if it means getting their c pawn. They don't want to do that, and I move the king up the board. Then tries to deflect away their rook, but they don't take the bait. And improve the rook, guarding and attacking the pawns. King d4. Rook h5, key move. So that if white tries to help the c-pawn move up, I should still be fine. If the c4 happens, I mean, I could even just play king e6 and then king d6 and stop the white king infiltrating onto the 5th rank. So rook a2, I bring my king across. The key area of influence, the zone of gravity, I believe Hartson calls it, is around the queen side. The h-pawn is just a sort of spectator here. As long as I keep a vague eye on it, I don't really need to be too concerned with kingside pawn moves. So rook g2, king d6, king c4, king c6, and white doesn't really have a good way to continue. So they check me a bit, and then check again, and I keep going over and back again, and we get a draw by repeated moves. You may think this is a bit early for white to take the draw, but there isn't really much they can do. So if king d4, for example, if rook g2, I'll just go back to c6. So king d4, and if I take, and then white tries pushing their pawn and moving up the board, I could easily deflect them away with the a-pawn, force their king back, and then just push the a-pawn, and white's going to have to keep an eye on the pawn. They'll have no way to push their pawn up the board. I mean, I don't even need to play king c5, but I would normally, because even here, even under the worst possible circumstances, where I can't catch the c-pawn, it's still an easy draw. All I do is stand in front of the pawn, and I'll just keep moving back to c6, and then step in front of their king, and then back to c7, and draw the king and pawn endgame. Very, very simple drawing technique. Stand in front, they push, I go in front, they go here, I go back behind the pawn again, in front of the king, c6, only move, king c7, back here, king c8 in front of the pawn, whichever way white goes in front of the king, check, king in front, and king c6, draw. So I was fairly pleased to draw that match. There probably were a few times I could have improved my play a little bit, but overall I think that was a good drawing game. And surprisingly, we actually won the final match. Board 1 was obviously the draw I've shown here. Board 2, I think we drew that one, if I remember right. Oh no, we lost board 2. No, we lost board 2, but then board 3 we won. With a very difficult rook and pawn endgame, a bit like this one. And then board 4, so that it was all tied up, but at board 4 we were completely lost, a rook down, and then their opponent blundered into a mate in 1. So we actually managed to win the game 2.5 to 1.5, winning the league and finishing in style. So thanks for watching this video, and see you in the next one. Bye.